Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Second Gen's Liberated Panda, live to you every Wednesday evening around 5 or 6 o'clock Eastern Time. We also want to let our audience know that Chinese subtitles will be added 2 to 3 hours after each live show.
So this week, Jason and I will be talking about the Anchorage meeting between the Chinese and US and their very first meeting since the beginning of the Biden administration. So who were the winners and losers? Were there even any winners or losers? We'll be talking about that.
Yep. We'll also be talking about the situation at the USMexico border. Why has there been such a sudden influx of potential crossers? How's the Biden administration handling it? And also, how's it affecting people in the border states like Texas?
And finally, we get to some tragic news, which is about new potential gun control legislation. That's not the tragic news. The tragic news is the two mass shootings. One was last week in Atlanta. Then one was yesterday in Colorado where 10 people died. So we will be discussing the new proposal of gun control legislation that's been being proposed by President Biden. Before we get to all of that, some interesting current events that our viewers might find interesting as well. First, for the good news, Jason, what do you have for us?
Good news. If you are against the death penalty, Virginia just moved to abolish the death penalty.
So how do you feel about the death penalty? For, against?
I am for the death penalty, but I definitely think we need to rethink how we do it. I think let's just be honest, right? Regardless of your beliefs, there's too many people on death row that are innocent or that have legitimate claims. And too many times we see overzealous prosecutors. And I think that that's where we kind of have to make this maybe a penalty we don't use as much, even though we do rarely use it.
Yeah. And, just to interject, I was actually surprised, floored to find out that putting someone on death row requires millions of dollars. So, when I was in law school, it was like $1 million. Now it's $2.3 million to put someone on death row because of all the, the case, the appeals and everything that goes into it. So it's actually 3 times more costly to put someone on death row than to keep them in prison for life, strange as it may seem.
That's, the cost is actually something that people say, well, put them on death row, the cost will be less, but you're absolutely right. That's never been the case.
Yeah. So, and then we also have some news that might make you mad. So some bad news, right? Also money related, has to do with taxes. So it's new reports came out saying that the top 1% fail to report 20% of their income, which is actually huge. If you're in the top 1%, that means you make over $550,000 a year. The average 1% person makes $1.2 million a year. So if we're taking 20% of that and not paying taxes, it comes out to be a huge number. What do you think about that, Jason?
I think that you said the top 1% fails to report 21% of their income.
20, yeah.
I feel like that is not as much as I thought that they would fail to report. But then again, it depends on how you define it, right? Do you define it as underreporting or just straight overlooking stuff? Minimalization, which is legal to a certain degree, right? And then or just not reporting. So
right. Okay. Well, so 6% of that 20% is through sophisticated legal mechanism. So I'm not sure what the other 14% is, but I do know that I read the 6% was legal.
So we were talking about that earlier, you and I think the odd thing is I would think more people would have multiple LLCs for things like boats, planes, not saying they all have planes, but like boats, a lot of the 1% do have boats somewhere, whether not even yachts, but regular boats. They have rental properties, for example, right? That they might stay at parts of the year, use them on Airbnb. Even if they don't really rent them out too much, they could still use that as a business. Just various. I'm surprised those various mechanisms aren't used more, to be honest.
Right. Well, they are. They are used, but they're also really expensive to set up. They're really, really complicated. You have to hire pretty much big law lawyers to do it, and they charge like thousands of dollars an hour. But if you're making, if you're in the top 1%, that's nothing probably. So
Totally.
yeah. But anyway, moving on to our first main topic of the day, Jason.
Yep. First main topic of the day, the Alaska meeting between China and the U.S. And other developing U.S.-China news. Angel, what did you think about this first summit? Honestly, I think it's the first foreign policy summit of the Biden administration, right?
Yeah, I actually don't know about that, but I guess it is. I haven't been, I don't know about that. But I know this was the first meeting between US and China, and I know Biden was delaying it for a reason, because he wanted to go internationally and form more alliances and speak to our partners in Korea and Japan, and kind of assess the situation and build a coalition. So I understand why there's been a delay in speaking to China, the second largest economy in the world. I honestly think the meeting was overhyped. Overhyped in China, I think. And I think in the Chinese American community, I understand why there's such a huge interest, but also I have to juxtapose that against what the average American knows about the China-Alaska talks, the US-China-Alaska talks. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but I kind of feel like an informal survey of my friends, most people didn't really even know it happened, or if they did know it happened, they know very little about it.
Honestly, the only thing I saw online on Twitter and stuff, and with friends that I've talked to about politics, is that they shared articles of the opening remarks and stuff where China was pretty snarky to the U.S. and Blinken accused them of being of grandstanding and stuff. So that's about it.
So they were I mean, maybe I'm American and I'm biased, but they were grandstanding a lot. So they were allocated, both sides were allocated 2 minutes to make their opening remarks, right? China went and they went over by 13 minutes, I believe, for 15 minutes total. And I don't think it was impromptu. And a lot of experts agree that it wasn't impromptu and it was prepared. And I think in that speech, one of the things that was trending on Weibo, which is the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, was this hashtag 美国没有资格就高龄下同中国说话, which means basically America doesn't have the doesn't have the moral authority to tell us what to do, kind of thing,
right?
Or has any business telling us what to do.
Right. And that was brought up. I think it was Wang Yi brought it up about how it was no way to treat our guest by saying the things that we said initially, and that America has its own problems with human rights, human rights with regards to Black Lives Matter, racism, also how we attempt to topple other authoritarian regimes. Look, we have a checkered past with a lot of this. But moral high ground, I mean, I have a hard time believing the U.S. doesn't have a moral high ground on China, specifically the CCP.
Right. Seriously.
But it was a contentious first meeting, right? I think that the whole point of it was to kind of level set the two sides, to look at the battleground, see where we're going to be fighting, basically, and China, hit hard with its first punch. And I think Blinken kind of didn't hit quite as hard with his. And it made the U.S. look a little bit weak. The moral high ground talk, I mean, it is grandstanding, right? But I think that these CCP ministers and stuff are not stupid. So they're trying to do stuff for sound bites. They know how the media works. They know they're going to pick up the sound bites. They're going to pick up those statements. They're going to replay it. I mean, even the Biden-friendly media in the U.S., your CNN, MSNBC, are going to take that and run with it. They're even going to play it, right? So let alone the anti-Biden stuff, which is fomenting divide in the U.S., which is good for the Chinese Communist Party.
Right, definitely. And I think it is a bit disingenuous, especially about the Black Lives Matter things, because China has its own very racist past and present against Black people in China. So again, moral high ground. Like, come on.
By the way, everybody, we will be having a guest on to discuss part of that who lived in China and is African American. So we will be discussing that in a future episode at some point. So that should be exciting. So you guys will get firsthand view on that as well. Sorry, Angel. I want to interject.
No, I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear what it feels like to be Black in China. So
I can't imagine it.
Yeah, I mean, but in conclusion with these like US-China talks, I think both have a point. I want to be fair. To the Chinese, I suppose the way Americans talk can be like seen as condescending, but it also feels like China's gotten a huge ego, right? Good for them. America has an ego too. USA, America.
It's a lot different though.
Yeah, I'm just saying, it's fine to be patriotic. I'm glad China feels that they can stand up to other countries. My biggest issue with China is that they bully under the guise of national interest, right? And they also said in the meeting that a lot of people in America don't even believe in democracy anymore. And my response to that is, okay, the CCP, if you're so certain that democracy is on its way out, then what are you afraid of, right? If democracy is such a bad system, such a weak system,
just write it out.
Right. So why not? So why put people in jail, right, for criticizing the government, for criticizing the great communist system? If it's such a great system, why put people in jail? Why build a great firewall up where you're not allowing your citizens to get information from neutral outside sources, or not neutral, but just not state sources? That's propaganda from China, and if you're so not afraid of democracy, why not let Hong Kong keep its democratic system, and not suffer the protests? So if you're so not scared of democracy, certainly your actions say you are. So that's how I feel.
It is. You're absolutely right, though. It is a very simple point that's brought up in America a lot. Those people who are speaking the truth and what's right do not censor the people who are wrong. In fact, they elevate the people who are wrong. So like in America, we would elevate the communists so that people hear how silly they sound. We would elevate it so that everybody can make their own decision and realize, man, that's stupid, which it kind of is. If they were right and it was really a better form of government, they could take their hands off of people, figuratively and literally, right? You wouldn't have what's happening with the Uyghurs. You wouldn't have what's happening in Hong Kong. You wouldn't have what's happening even with Taiwan, and all the times that they try to intervene in American domestic policy. You wouldn't have that because you don't need it, because in the world, their ideas are bigger, better, and they wouldn't need to try to change it. So I think that overall, one thing I will say, I thought it was good that Blinken hit on that. We mentioned our allies. China uses a lot of economic coercion towards some of our allies. You look at the One Belt, One Road program, where they've basically given out loans that can't be repaid for ports and stuff, and then they take them back to try to increase their infrastructure. It's a very interesting and conniving, let's call it, way to increase your foreign holdings. You know?
No, to take advantage of third world countries. Absolutely.
Really. But the good thing is, I think that we're working through that, though, too. Countries aren't taking these loans anymore because they're seeing like stuff. I believe one of them happened in Kenya. I know Angola has a lot of Chinese influence. So you see that, but now it's starting to shift a little bit back. So maybe the pendulum's starting to swing. And I think that it's a really good opportunity for the Biden administration now that they're kind of at that upswing in some ways where they do have the moral high ground. But part of that is maybe domestically, maybe they need to revisit how much the administration pushes stuff like BLM. Maybe they need to play more of a hands off with that in some aspects and let it work itself out in some ways. I'm not saying race in general. I'm saying like that movement, because they've been very vocal with it. So maybe they should be less vocal with it. And that way, China couldn't use that as a pawn.
Yeah, I mean, so I wanted to move on to the next topic of the day, the
Hmm.
shooting. But I think, I don't think the government has had like an overwhelming response to the BLM movement. So, um, I think they are taking a very much hands-off approach, and I think that's why they're protesting, right? I mean, that's how I see it, at least. But
I don't think it's as hands off as what it might look. I think when you have certain officials openly criticizing like the previous regime for it, now you get in office maybe on the heels of that, but now you have to deal with the same problems that you caused from that, and that's going to link to something else we talk about later. But
mm,
sometimes you're better off not being in power, because certain ideas and viewpoints you're really good at pushing if you're not in power. But then when you get in power, you have a problem you have to deal with when that viewpoint doesn't mesh up with having the majority.
right. And I just want to clarify Jason's point. Like you're basically saying you're a believer, like a lot of conservatives and Republicans, you're a believer that governments should have a hands-off approach when it comes to a lot of things in, like in our personal lives. That we're
Oh
better
yeah,
off having less government intervention. You're not saying we shouldn't support the BLM movement. You're just saying the government should not interfere with that, right?
correct.
Okay,
I think that's
yeah.
I think that sometimes when specific politicians are very vocal on it and they push a movement forward, they then have to deal with it when they're in office or when they win, and that's not always easy. And sometimes that presents more problems and greater problems than if they said, "I agree with you, we're working towards it," but they're not front and center.
Right. Which, yeah, again, is like very much what conservatives and Republicans believe in.
Mhm.
And that's how they, so I completely support that,
I
viewpoint.
love the BLM movement in general, all of them.
Right.
All the
Yeah, that's what I
movements that
wanted to make clear. Jason and
Oh
I
yeah.
are both supporters of the BLM movement. So, but I totally get your point. I just wanted to clarify.
Yes,
But
thank you. Sorry about that.
I just wanted to move on to the next topic of the day, which is something that's near and dear to all of our hearts because we suffer, the trauma of mass shootings all the time. So there was another mass shooting yesterday in Boulder, Colorado. I'm sorry. So Jason, can you shed some light on what's going on with the shootings, the death of the 10 people, and the new proposed gun legislation?
Um, the shootings themselves, we are seeing, it looks like an uptick in mass shooting events. I don't know how accurate that is. Over the, it didn't seem like we've had a lot lately before these last two.
Mhm.
I know that the one in Atlanta, it seemed as though they targeted Asian Americans. We discussed it last week. It looks like the jury could still be out on that, although it does definitely seem like he targeted uh, businesses where a lot of Asian American women work.
Mhm.
If race was an issue in that, that's one thing. This shooting here that happened yesterday was from I guess, a Syrian immigrant, if that's correct, in Colorado at a grocery store. And I don't know if it was politically motivated.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but
So we don't know a lot of details about the
yeah, we don't know
Colorado.
a lot about that yet.
Right.
I know he
I
posted some stuff, but it's not right now. We don't really have anything, so I'm not going to jump to any conclusions.
Right. So let me just interject about the Atlanta shootings. I just have to like say I so appreciate the outpouring of support for Asian Americans in this country. It was so unexpected. I honestly didn't expect it, and I just thought that that was such a great moment for Americans. Because since when Trump was president, it kind of felt like we didn't matter, and I just assumed that we still wouldn't matter. And this isn't a Trump thing, like Asian Americans almost never get brought up in political discourse. It's always,
Mhm.
about the Latin vote, the black vote, the white vote, like we just never get brought up. So it's just nice to be heard and seen.
Which is crazy because Asian Americans are such a large voting bloc, but you guys kind of fit in with various other blocs, I guess. I don't know
We're
how that
not
whole
though.
identity thing works. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But let's just state though too. There
Yeah.
has been an uptake in crime. What looks like specifically geared towards Asian Americans in the recent past. So that is very concerning. Everybody talks about the history of this country with various races, but don't forget Asian Americans were very low paid workers building the transcontinental railroad. A lot of Chinese Americans. FDR interned Japanese Americans in camps for World War II because they were all spies. Used some very shoddy legalese on that.
Yes, yeah, and the
Oh.
Supreme Court upheld that, and it was considered one of the most disgraceful Supreme Court decisions ever. So, yeah.
And they
So
use a decision that I correct me if I'm wrong, is one that's normally viewed as not very good precedent, the Jacobson one,
yes,
late
and
19th century.
right. So this, that Supreme Court case with the Japanese internment camps, that's just been completely overturned. Like that's we're hopefully never ever going to go back there again. But we want to go from that, the shooting, since we don't really know much about the color. The gun control legislation. So what's being put up?
Yes. Never let a tragedy go to waste, right? So they've already started on gun control legislation, specifically assault weapons. As always, there's going to get a lot of talk about an assault weapons ban. That ban is probably not going to pass. It probably won't be held up in the Supreme Court, and we will go back to square one, and it'll become another issue for the midterm election. As to what an assault weapon is, it's kind of like whatever somebody wants to define it. A lot of rifles, you have, it's not handguns, but the amount of shootings that are done and the amount of people killed, much greater with handguns than with any rifles. But typically, I think what they're going to want to look at is assault rifles, which would be semi-automatic. So for those of our viewers out there that don't understand, there's various types of ways to fire. You have automatic, which is a machine gun. So you pull the trigger once and multiple bullets come out as long as you hold it down. A semi-automatic, you pull the trigger once, one bullet comes out, then the trigger decompresses, and the inertia from the firing ejects the casing that is in from the port when the bullet is fired. So you fire the bullet, the casing goes out, all with one pull, and then your trigger resets and you can pull it again. So, and then after that, you have various like revolvers, where one shot, one bullet, same thing. And then you also have, like, when it comes to shotguns, sometimes you have like pump action where you have to kind of manually do it. Or with rifles, you have what's called the bolt action. So you fire and then you have to go to and so that's the various types. What they're talking about is the semi-automatic rifle specifically.
So just really quickly, Jason, I know you want to talk about the border situation. Like I made up like two charts, states with the most gun violence and states with the least gun violence. I don't know if you got a chance to look at that. If you didn't, that's okay. I mean, it's being thrown up as a graphic, as we're speaking right now. And the one thing that I wanted to point out actually was I was looking at about like through patterns, and the states with the most gun violence, they were states that allowed you to not have a permit to like open carry, whereas like the states with like the least gun violence were states that do not allow you to or require a permit for you to open carry, or don't, or have like you have to jump through hoops to be able to open carry, like in New York. So like I feel like legislation like that is fine, right? You don't think so?
I mean, I think that it's hit or miss. The problem is that if criminals follow the law, they wouldn't be criminals. So a lot of people who get their guns illegally, they're not getting their guns legally in order to commit crimes. Some sure, yes, but not a lot, not all of them, and not a lot of them. So I just don't see where necessarily more gun control laws. We have started permitting more. Even I live in Texas. It used to be an open carry state. Now you need a license to carry. So you just can't carry a gun on your hip anywhere. So I mean, look, I'm more than okay with the licensing part to a certain degree, as long as you don't keep people from responsible firearm ownership, right?
Right.
So
Right. So like the Atlanta shooter, just really quickly, like he bought his gun the day of. And remember the police said he had a bad day. So maybe if he wasn't having a bad day and he was like, or if he's having a bad day, but he couldn't get access to the gun, then maybe it wouldn't have happened. I don't know. So that's just a little tidbit. But I do want to move on. Sorry. And I know I'm sure you want to respond.
no, the bad day thing's just a weird, like, it's a weird argument. I think that that's just bogus.
Right, I agree. But so moving on to something that's also near and dear to Jason's heart because he's living in a border town, right? So the US-Mexico border. There's a situation. Is it a crisis? We don't know. Jason's going to very briefly tell us about like what's going on down there.
All right, so what's going on in Texas? We have had an influx of border crossers or potential border crossers come in here recently since the election. Attempted crossings have risen 28% in February per NBC News. You're seeing images of migrant caravans everywhere across the news. And according to Border Patrol, Customs and Border Patrol, we've had 4 individuals on terrorist watch lists apprehended by the CBP since inauguration. Also, another big number that's an issue. Unaccompanied minors are up from 2,600 in 2019's peak to 9,400 today. I think this was last week per New York Times and DHS. So there's a lot of questions about whether or not this is because of Biden policy or if there's the perception of Biden's policy, right? I think that we can all agree that at the very least, a lot of the border crossers think that the Biden policy is going to be good for them, right? That they're going to be able to get in. Joe Biden's going to let them in. They're not just random people. Somebody had T-shirts made up that said "Biden let us in" Spanish. So it's not, they are somewhat organized. So there's some questions on whether or not it is this administration's fault or not, or if it's just kind of a natural happening. What I can tell you is that right now, regardless of if it's their fault or not, I think going back to what I was discussing earlier about the rhetoric, right? If you have the rhetoric before you get elected that you're going to open up the border and you are going to tear a wall down that was being built, and you are going to change policy drastically, I think that at a certain point, people are going to listen to that and they're not just going to say, yeah, I agree. Other people are they're going to see it and they might come and you will see an influx. And I don't know why they didn't think of that. Like, they didn't rationalize it. Their words, their actions actually have consequences when they say those things. And the consequences now is that we're getting an influx that we are not prepared to handle. Part of the Trump administration building the wall on the southern border was to help prevent Customs and Border Patrol from getting overwhelmed, which right now they are getting overwhelmed. We had somebody write a letter, one of the agents, saying, these kids that we just had on the screen there or these individuals in those cages were haven't had showers in days. If something happened, would they even be able to escape if there was a fire or carbon monoxide poisoning? They're just overcrowded by about 25%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but once you start going and then it doesn't stop, 25 becomes 45, becomes 50, becomes 60. So now the administration's looking at moving a lot of unaccompanied teenage minors up to like Dallas, for example, but they didn't contact the state. They didn't contact the city of Dallas about it. I guess they just leased the area and made that plan. So there's a lot of stuff even inside the state of Texas, for example, that is kind of questionable. And one thing that I especially want to hit on, immigration in Texas is a bipartisan issue. Those images from Axios came from a Democratic politician, a Democratic House member who went to the facility this past week. They weren't allowed to bring cameras in, but I guess they snuck them and they took some pictures.
Well, I wish we could give you more time to talk about it because I also wanted to like discuss this some more. So if this is still a crisis or situation next week, let's have a continuation of this conversation because it is very interesting and it does impact so many Americans, especially in Texas, right? But that's all the time we have for today. We like to thank our sponsor, Wei Tang. Thank you, Wei
Thank you,
Tang.
Wei.
And please join us next week here on Second Gen's Liberated Panda. We'll be talking about current events. Who knows what the week will bring us, and more about the border crisis situation. Jason?
Border crisis.
Oh, no, I'm just saying, like, do you have any last words to our audience?
Oh, yeah. Have a great week, everyone.
Have a great week.
I'm sure.
Bye. Happy Easter.
Almost. See you guys.